The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the small window of the cramped apartment when 17-year-old David Johnson woke up to the sound of his alarm. Today wasn't just any ordinary day. Today was the day he had been dreaming about for months. He was finally going to board that plane to Atlanta, where his future was waiting for him. David had grown up in one of Detroit's toughest neighborhoods, where dreams often got crushed before they even had a chance to bloom. But this young man was different. While his friends were hanging out on street corners, David was buried in his engineering textbooks. While others gave up on school, he was staying up late working on math problems that most kids his age couldn't even understand. His grandmother, who had raised him since he was 8 years old, always told him the same thing every morning before school. "Baby, you've got something special inside you. Don't let nobody tell you different." Those words had carried him through every difficult moment, every time someone doubted him, every time he felt like giving up. The scholarship letter sat on his small wooden desk, folded and unfolded so many times that the creases were worn soft. Georgia Tech Summer Engineering Program, full scholarship recipient. He had read those words 100 times, but they still didn't feel real. Out of thousands of applicants from across the country, they had chosen him, a kid from the projects, who had never even been on an airplane before. David's grandmother had worked double shifts at the hospital for 3 weeks straight, just to save enough money for his travel expenses. "This is your shot, baby," she had whispered to him the night before, her weathered hands holding his face gently. "You go show them what we already know. You're going to change the world someday." The airport was bigger and busier than anything David had ever seen. People rushed past him in expensive suits, dragging sleek suitcases behind them like they owned the world. He clutched his old backpack tighter, feeling suddenly out of place among all the confident travelers who seemed to know exactly where they were going. His ticket was tucked safely in his front pocket, but he pulled it out again just to make sure. Flight 447 to Atlanta, seat 12A. He had gotten lucky with the seat assignment. Somehow the airline system had upgraded him to premium economy, using the frequent flyer miles he had earned from traveling to debate tournaments across the state. His debate coach had always said that David had a gift for standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. The boarding announcement echoed through the busy terminal, and David felt his heart start to race. This was really happening. He was really leaving Detroit, really going to one of the best engineering schools in the country, really getting his chance to make something of himself. As he walked down the narrow tunnel leading to the plane, David thought about all the people who had helped him get here. His grandmother, who had sacrificed everything for his education. His math teacher, who had stayed after school every day to help him prepare for the scholarship exam. His debate coach, who had driven him to competitions in her own car because the school couldn't afford a bus. The airplane was smaller than he had expected, but it looked clean and modern. David had watched videos online about flying, trying to prepare himself for this moment. He knew to look for his row number and find his seat by the window. The other passengers were settling in around him, most of them looking like they flew all the time. There were businessmen in crisp shirts talking loudly on their phones about important meetings. Families with young children were trying to get organized, stuffing bags into overhead compartments and keeping their kids entertained. A few college students were already pulling out their laptops, ready to work during the flight. David found row 12 and stopped to double-check his ticket one more time. Seat 12A. Window seat. He couldn't help but smile a little as he imagined looking down at the clouds from thousands of feet in the air. His grandmother had never been on a plane either, and he was already planning to tell her every detail when he called her tonight. The seat was more comfortable than he had expected, with extra legroom and a small pillow already waiting for him. David carefully placed his backpack under the seat in front of him, making sure his scholarship letter and important documents were secure in the front pocket. Everything he needed for the next 6 weeks was in that bag. His clothes, his notebooks, and most importantly, the letter that had changed his life. He pulled out his phone to send a quick text to his grandmother, letting her know he had made it onto the plane safely. She would be starting her shift at the hospital soon, but he knew she would want to hear from him. On the plane now, Thank you for everything. I love you." He hit send and then turned his phone to airplane mode, just like the instructions had said. The other passengers in his section seemed friendly enough. There was a middle-aged woman across the aisle reading a thick book, and a man in a business suit who had nodded politely when David sat down. Everyone seemed focused on their own journey, their own destination, their own reasons for being on this particular flight. David looked out the small window next to his seat and watched the ground crew loading luggage into the bottom of the plane. He wondered if his old duffel bag was somewhere in that pile, making its first airplane journey just like he was. Everything about this experience was new and exciting, from the safety demonstration to the sound of the engines starting up. The flight attendants were beginning their pre-flight routine, checking that everyone's seatbelts were fastened and that carry-on bags were properly stored. David watched them work with professional efficiency, impressed by how smoothly everything seemed to operate. Flying was clearly something that required skill and attention to detail, qualities that David respected and admired. One of the flight attendants was walking down the aisle, checking each row carefully. She was an older woman with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the airline's uniform with obvious pride. Her name tag read, Patricia, and she had the kind of serious expression that suggested she took her job very seriously. David felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he sat there waiting for takeoff. This was the beginning of everything he had worked for. 6 weeks at Georgia Tech, learning from some of the best engineering professors in the country. 6 weeks to prove that he belonged there, that he could compete with students from the most expensive private schools in America. His phone buzzed with a reply from his grandmother. "So proud of you, baby. Fly high and remember who you are." David smiled and tucked the phone away, feeling a warm sense of confidence wash over him. He was ready for this challenge. He was ready to show the world what a kid from Detroit could accomplish when given the chance. The plane was almost full now, and David could sense the anticipation building among the passengers. Everyone was ready to get to their destination, ready to start the next chapter of their journey. For David, this wasn't just a flight to Atlanta. This was the first step toward a future he had only dared to dream about. David was still looking out the window, watching the ground crew finish their work, when he noticed someone standing in the aisle next to his seat. He looked up to see Patricia, the flight attendant he had observed earlier, staring down at him, with a stern expression that made his stomach suddenly feel tight. "Excuse me," Patricia said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise of the cabin. Several passengers in nearby seats turned their heads to see what was happening. "You need to move. This seat isn't for you." David blinked, certain he had misheard her. The words didn't make sense. He had checked his ticket 3 times, confirmed his seat assignment at the gate, and had been sitting here for nearly 10 minutes without any problems. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" he asked politely, hoping this was just some kind of misunderstanding. Patricia's expression didn't soften. If anything, it became even more rigid. "I said this seat isn't for you. You need to gather your things and move to the back of the plane where you belong." The way she emphasized the word belong made David's cheeks burn with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. The teenager reached into his pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, his hands trembling slightly. This had to be a mistake. Maybe there was a computer error, or maybe someone else had been assigned the same seat. "Ma'am, here's my ticket, seat 12A. I checked in online and everything seemed fine." Patricia barely glanced at the boarding pass before waving it away dismissively. "There's obviously been some kind of error in the system. These premium seats are reserved for our valued customers, and I need you to move immediately." David felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Around him, other passengers were starting to pay attention to the scene unfolding in row 12. Some were pretending not to notice, suddenly becoming very interested in their phones or magazines. Others were openly staring, and David could see a few people already reaching for their phones to record what was happening. "But this is my assigned seat," David said, trying to keep his voice steady and respectful. His grandmother had always taught him to be polite to adults, especially those in positions of authority. I earned these frequent flyer miles through my debate team travels, and the system upgraded me automatically. Patricia let out a small, bitter laugh that made David feel even smaller. Frequent flyer miles at your age? I don't think so. Look, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know when someone doesn't belong in premium seating. Now please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The woman across the aisle was now openly watching the exchange. Her book, forgotten in her lap. David could see the discomfort in her eyes, but she remained silent. A businessman 2 rows ahead had turned around completely, his phone pointed in their direction. The family with young children had gone quiet, the parents clearly trying to figure out what was happening. David's mind was racing. He thought about all those late nights studying for the scholarship exam, all those debate tournaments where he had learned to argue his case with facts and logic. He thought about his grandmother working double shifts to pay for this trip, and about the professors at Georgia Tech who were expecting him to arrive tomorrow morning. Ma'am, I understand there might be some confusion, but I can show you my scholarship letter, my student ID, and my confirmation email. I'm traveling to Atlanta for an engineering program, and this is definitely my correct seat assignment. Patricia's face was getting redder by the minute. Other passengers were now whispering among themselves, and David could feel dozens of eyes focused on him. The humiliation was overwhelming, but underneath the embarrassment, something else was starting to build. A quiet anger that reminded him of every time someone had looked at him and decided he didn't belong somewhere. I don't care about any scholarship letter, Patricia snapped. What I care about is maintaining order on this aircraft. These seats cost extra money, and they're meant for passengers who have paid the premium fare. I'm going to ask you one more. Time to move voluntarily or I'll have to call security. The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. David looked around the cabin and saw the mixture of expressions on people's faces. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed uncomfortable, and a few appeared to be enjoying the drama. But what struck him most was how familiar this all felt. Not the airplane part, but the assumption, the immediate judgment that he didn't belong in a nice seat, that he must have made some kind of mistake, that someone like him couldn't possibly have earned his way into premium seating. His grandmother's voice echoed in his head. Baby, you've got something special inside you. Don't let nobody tell you different. David straightened his shoulders and looked Patricia directly in the eyes. The scared, confused teenager was still there, but now there was something else too. A quiet strength that came from knowing he was right. Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not moving from my assigned seat unless there's a legitimate safety reason or a real system error that you can show me, David said, his voice clearer now despite his racing heart. I've followed all the rules, I have valid documentation, and I have every right to be here. Patricia's mouth fell open slightly. Clearly, she had expected him to comply immediately, to apologize and shuffle toward the back of the plane with his head down. The fact that this teenager was standing up to her seemed to catch her completely off guard. How dare you talk back to me? She hissed, her voice getting louder. I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and when I give you an instruction, you follow it. Period. If you don't get up right now and move to your proper seat, I will have airport security drag you off this plane. The cabin had gone almost completely silent now. Even the young children seemed to sense that something serious was happening. David could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, but he stayed planted in his seat. Every instinct told him to just give in, to avoid making a scene, to take whatever seat they wanted to give him and be grateful for it. But then he thought about why he was on this plane in the first place. He thought about all the obstacles he had already overcome just to get here. He thought about his grandmother's sacrifices and his teacher's faith in him. He thought about the other kids from his neighborhood who had given up on their dreams because someone had convinced them they didn't deserve better. Then you'll need to call security, David said quietly, because I'm not leaving my assigned seat. The words seemed to echo through the cabin. Patricia's face went from red to purple, and David could see her hands shaking with anger. Several passengers had now pulled out their phones and were clearly recording the confrontation. The businessman across the aisle was shaking his head in disbelief, and the woman with the book was looking at Patricia with obvious disapproval. What none of them knew was that in the cockpit, Someone else was listening to every word of this exchange. Someone who had dealt with situations like this before and who was about to make a decision that would change everything. The silence in the cabin felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. David could feel every pair of eyes focused on him as he sat there, his heart hammering against his chest so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Patricia stood frozen in the aisle, clearly not expecting this young man to refuse her demands so firmly. For a moment, David wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. Maybe he should just move to avoid causing more trouble. Maybe he should apologize and take whatever seat they wanted to give him. After all, he was just 17 years old and she was an adult with authority on this airplane. But then he remembered something his debate coach had told him during one of their practice sessions. David, Coach Rodriguez had said, there will come times in your life when you have to choose between being comfortable and being right. Those moments will define who you become as a man. This was one of those moments. Patricia was fumbling with her radio, trying to contact someone on the ground. Her face was still flushed with anger, and her hands were shaking as she struggled with the device. Ground control, this is Flight 447. I need security personnel at Gate B12 immediately. We have an uncooperative passenger who is refusing to follow crew instructions. The woman across the aisle suddenly spoke up, her voice clear and firm. Excuse me, but I've been watching this entire situation and this young man has done nothing wrong. He showed you his valid boarding pass. He's been completely respectful, and he's sitting in his assigned seat. Patricia whirled around to face her. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is an airline matter and doesn't involve other passengers. Please mind your own business. But now the businessman from 2 rows up was standing in the aisle. Actually, it does involve all of us. We're all witnesses to what's happening here, and frankly, I'm disgusted by what I'm seeing. He looked directly at David with a supportive nod. Son, you have every right to sit in that seat and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. More passengers were starting to speak up. A college student near the back called out, "This is completely unfair." An elderly gentleman shook his head and said loudly, "In all my years of flying, I've never seen anything like this." David felt a strange mixture of gratitude and embarrassment as these strangers began defending him. Part of him wanted to disappear completely, but another part felt strengthened by their support. These people didn't even know him, but they could see that what was happening wasn't right. Patricia was becoming more flustered by the minute. The situation was spiraling out of her control, and the other passengers were clearly not supporting her actions. She tried to regain her authority by raising her voice. Everyone needs to calm down and let me handle this situation. This passenger does not belong in premium seating, and I have the authority to reassign seats as I see fit. Based on what? Demanded the businessman. His skin color? Because that's what this looks like to all of us. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Everyone in the cabin knew exactly what was happening, even if she wouldn't admit it. This wasn't about seat assignments or computer errors or airline policies. This was about a flight attendant who had looked at a young black teenager and decided he didn't belong in a nice seat. David found his voice again, stronger this time. Ma'am, I've been nothing but polite and respectful to you. I've shown you my valid ticket. I've explained how I earned the upgrade. And I've followed every rule. The only reason you want me to move is because you've decided that someone who looks like me doesn't deserve to sit here. Patricia's face went pale. That's absolutely not true. This has nothing to do with... I don't see color. This is purely about seat assignments and airline policy. Then show me the policy, said the woman with the book, who had now put it down completely. Show us all exactly which airline policy allows you to remove a passenger from their assigned seat based on your personal judgment about whether they belong there. A teenage girl near the middle of the plane was recording everything on her phone. This is going straight to social media, she announced. Everyone needs to see how this airline treats its passengers. Patricia looked around frantically, realizing that this situation was quickly becoming a public relations nightmare. Multiple phones were now pointed in her direction, and the passengers were clearly unified in their support for David. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her position. "I don't care what any of you think," she said, her voice getting shrill. "I am in charge of this aircraft and I have made my decision. Either this passenger moves voluntarily, or security will remove him. Those are his only options." David felt something shift inside him. All his life, people had tried to make him smaller, to convince him that he should be grateful for whatever scraps he was given. Teachers who assumed he wasn't college material, store clerks who followed him around, police officers who looked at him with suspicion, and now this flight attendant who had decided, within seconds of seeing him, that he didn't deserve his seat. But he wasn't that scared little boy anymore. He was David Johnson, scholarship winner, debate champion, future engineer. He had earned his place on this plane just like he had earned everything else in his life. "Then call security," David said, his voice steady and clear. "Because I'm not moving from my assigned seat. I've done nothing wrong. I've violated no policies, and I have every right to be here. If you want me removed, you'll have to drag me off this plane in front of all these witnesses and all these cameras." The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers were clapping and cheering, showing their support for this brave teenager who was standing up for himself and for what was right. The sound was overwhelming, and David felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of gratitude for these strangers who had chosen to stand with him. Patricia looked around the cabin in shock. Her authority had completely crumbled, and she was facing a unified group of passengers who were clearly on David's side. She reached for her radio again, her hands shaking even more now. But before she could make another call, a new voice cut through the noise. It was coming from the cockpit intercom, calm and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The entire cabin fell silent instantly. Even Patricia froze, her radio halfway to her mouth. "We are currently experiencing a delay due to a passenger service issue that requires my immediate personal attention. Please remain seated while we resolve this matter. I will be out to address the situation momentarily." David felt his breath catch. He had no idea what was about to happen, but something in the captain's tone told him that everything was about to change. Patricia's face had gone completely white and she was staring at the cockpit door like she had just seen a ghost. The passengers around David began whispering excitedly among themselves. Someone near the front said, "Good. The captain's getting involved." Another person added, "It's about time someone with real authority stepped in." David sat back in his seat, his heart still racing but his resolve stronger than ever. Whatever happened next, he had stood up for himself. He had refused to be pushed around or made to feel less than he was. His grandmother would be proud, and, more importantly, he was proud of himself. The cockpit door began to open and everyone in the cabin turned to see who would emerge. The cockpit door swung open with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo through the entire cabin. Every passenger held their breath as a figure emerged, and David felt his eyes widen in surprise. The captain was not what he had expected it. All Captain Lisa Thompson was a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and 4 gold stripes gleaming on her uniform shoulders. She moved with the confident stride of someone who had been flying for decades, someone who had earned respect in a field where women, especially women of color, had to fight twice as hard to prove themselves. David noticed immediately that Captain Thompson was black, just like him. Her presence seemed to fill the entire cabin as she walked purposefully down the aisle, her keen eyes taking in every detail of the scene before her. Patricia, who had been so commanding and authoritative just moments before, suddenly looked very small and uncertain. "Ms. Reynolds," Captain Thompson said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of making life and death decisions at 30,000 feet. "Would you please explain to me exactly what's happening here?" Patricia stammered, clearly caught off guard by having to justify her actions to her superior. "Captain, we have a seating issue. This passenger is in premium seating, and I believe there's been some kind of error in the system. I was just trying to resolve the situation by moving him to a more appropriate seat." Captain Thompson's expression didn't change, but David could see something sharp flash in her eyes. "A more appropriate seat?" she repeated slowly. And what makes his current seat inappropriate? Well, he doesn't. The premium seats are for. Patricia floundered, realizing that every explanation she could think of would only make things worse for her. The captain turned to David, and her expression softened slightly. "Young man, may I see your boarding pass, please?" David handed over, his ticket with hands that were steadier now than they had been in the past 20 minutes. Captain Thompson examined it carefully, then pulled out her phone and spent a moment checking something on the screen. The cabin remained completely silent as everyone watched her work. "Mr. Johnson," she said, reading his name from the boarding pass. "According to our system, you checked in online 12 hours ago for this flight. Your frequent flyer account shows that you earned these miles through multiple trips for academic competitions. Your upgrade to premium economy was processed automatically based on your loyalty status and seat availability. Is this information correct?" "Yes, ma'am," David replied, his voice clear and respectful. "I've been traveling for debate tournaments for the past 2 years, and I always fly with this airline because my school has a corporate account." Captain Thompson nodded and turned back to Patricia, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Ms. Reynolds, can you please explain to me what policy or procedure justifies removing a passenger from their properly assigned seat?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Captain, I just thought, someone his age in premium seating, it seemed unusual." "Unusual?" Captain Thompson's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "Are you suggesting that young people aren't allowed in premium seating? Or perhaps you're saying that scholarship students don't deserve the same treatment as other passengers?" The businessman who had defended David earlier spoke up. "Captain, I've been watching this entire situation unfold, and your flight attendant has been completely out of line. This young man has been nothing but polite and respectful, and he's done absolutely nothing wrong." Several other passengers murmured their agreement. The woman with the book nodded vigorously. "She's been treating him terribly from the moment she saw him. It's been absolutely disgraceful." Captain Thompson raised her hand slightly, and the cabin fell quiet again. "I appreciate everyone's input, and I want to assure you all that I take these matters very seriously." She turned back to David. "Mr. Johnson, on behalf of this airline, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you've received today. You are exactly where you belong, and you should never have been made to feel otherwise." David felt a lump form in his throat. After 30 minutes of being made to feel like he was somehow wrong, like he didn't deserve to be there, having the captain validate his right to that seat meant more than he could express. "Thank you, Captain Thompson, I really appreciate that." But the captain wasn't finished. She turned to address the entire cabin, her voice carrying clearly to every passenger. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be very clear about something. This airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. Every passenger who boards our aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their age, their background, or any other factor." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "What happened here today is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of this company or this crew. I want to personally assure Mr. Johnson and all of you that this matter will be addressed immediately and appropriately." Patricia was now visibly shaking, finally understanding the full gravity of her situation. "Captain, I didn't mean. I wasn't trying to. I've been with this airline for 15 years and I've never had any complaints." Captain Thompson cut her off with a look. "Ms. Reynolds, we'll discuss this matter privately in just a moment. Right now, my priority is ensuring that our passengers are comfortable and that we can continue with this flight." She turned back to David one more time. "Mr. Johnson, is there anything else I can do to make the rest of your flight experience more pleasant? Perhaps a complimentary meal or beverage service?" David shook his head, still overwhelmed by the captain's intervention. "No, ma'am, thank you. I just want to get to Atlanta for my program." "An engineering program, I assume?" Captain Thompson smiled for the first time since leaving the cockpit. "That's wonderful. The world needs more young engineers, especially ones who have the courage to stand up for themselves when faced with injustice." The passengers around David began to applaud again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just support for his brave stand. It was celebration of his accomplishments and his future. David felt his cheeks flush with pride rather than embarrassment. Captain Thompson turned to Patricia with an expression that had grown serious again. "Ms. Reynolds, please gather your personal belongings and report to the gate immediately. You'll be replaced for this flight, and we'll be conducting a full investigation into this incident." Patricia's face crumpled. "Captain, please, I need this job. I have a family to support." "You should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate a passenger based on your own prejudices," Captain Thompson replied firmly. "Ground. Crew will escort you off the aircraft." As if on cue, 2 airline supervisors appeared at the front of the plane. Patricia gathered her things with shaking hands while the entire cabin watched in silence. As she walked past David's seat, she couldn't meet his eyes. Once she was gone, Captain Thompson addressed the cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have a replacement flight attendant on board shortly, and then we'll be ready for departure. Thank you all for your patience during this delay, and thank you especially to those passengers who spoke up for what was right. That takes courage, and it makes a difference." She paused at David's seat on her way back to the cockpit. "Mr. Johnson, you handled yourself with remarkable dignity today. Whatever you accomplish in that engineering program, I have no doubt you're going to do great things." As Captain Thompson disappeared back into the cockpit, David settled back into his seat, his rightfully assigned seat, and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He felt truly proud of himself, not just for his academic achievements, but for having the courage to stand up when it mattered most. The new flight attendant who replaced Patricia was a young woman named Jennifer, who went out of her way to make sure David felt welcome. She brought him an extra snack and checked on him twice during the flight, her warm smile a complete contrast to the hostility he had faced earlier. But it wasn't just Jennifer who made the rest of the journey special. As the plane finally lifted off the ground an hour later than scheduled, something remarkable had happened in that cabin. The passengers who had witnessed the confrontation didn't just forget about it and go back to their books and phones. Instead, they began talking to David, sharing their own stories and offering encouragement for his future. The businessman from 2 rows up who introduced himself as Mr. Williams came over during the flight to give David his business card. "I'm a civil engineer," he explained with a genuine smile. "I've been working in construction for 25 years, and let me tell you something. The industry needs more young people like you. People who won't back down when things get tough." David studied the card carefully. "Williams Construction. Company, senior partner." "Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your support back there. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me." Mr. Williams shook his head firmly. "Son, what happened to you today was wrong. Plain and simple. But the way you handled, and that showed real character. When you finish your program at Georgia Tech, you give me a call. We're always looking for talented engineers who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right." The woman with the book, Mrs. Henderson, also came to speak with David during the flight. She was a retired teacher who had spent 40 years working in inner-city schools. "Honey, I've seen a lot of young people over the years, and I can tell you have something special. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong somewhere. You earned that seat just like you'll earn everything else you achieve. Moi." Pressed a small piece of paper into his hand. "That's my email address. I want you to write to me and let me know how your program goes. And if you ever need someone to talk to about college applications or anything else, you reach out to me." But perhaps the most unexpected connection came from the teenage girl who had been recording the incident. Her name was Ashley, and she was actually a sophomore at Georgia Tech. "I can't believe what just happened to you," she said, settling into the empty seat next to David for a few minutes. "But I'm so glad I got it all on video. This needs to be seen." David felt a flutter of nervousness. "You're really going to post it online?" Ashley nodded seriously. "With your permission, yes. People need to see how you handled yourself in that situation. You were so calm and respectful even when she was being completely unfair to you. That takes real strength." She pulled out her phone and showed David some of the footage. Watching himself on the small screen was surreal, He could see the fear in his own eyes at the beginning, but also the moment when something shifted and he found his courage. The thing is, Ashley continued, this isn't just about one flight attendant being prejudiced. This kind of thing happens all the time, and most people don't have the courage to stand up like you did. Your story could inspire other people to speak up when they see injustice. David thought about that for a long moment. He had never considered himself someone who could inspire others. He was just a kid from Detroit trying to get to school. But maybe that was exactly why his story mattered. When the plane finally touched down in Atlanta, something beautiful happened. As David stood up to gather his belongings, the entire cabin began applauding again. It wasn't the angry, supportive applause from earlier during the confrontation. This was different. It was celebratory, encouraging, hopeful. Captain Thompson's voice came over the intercom one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta. I want to thank you all once again for your patience during our delay and for demonstrating the kind of humanity and solidarity that makes me proud to fly. Special congratulations to Mr. Johnson as he begins his engineering program. We're all rooting for your success. As David walked off the plane, several passengers stopped to shake his hand or give him encouraging words. Mr. Williams reminded him again about the job offer. Mrs. Henderson gave him a quick hug and made him promise to email her. Ashley showed him her social media handle so he could see when she posted the video. But the most meaningful moment came when Captain Thompson appeared at the gate as David was walking toward baggage claim. She had changed out of her pilot's uniform and was carrying a small duffel bag. "Mr. Johnson," she called out, and David turned around, surprised to see her. "Captain Thompson, I thought you were staying with the plane." She smiled and fell into step beside him as they walked. "I have a layover here before my next flight, and I wanted to make sure you were okay after everything that happened today." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before she continued. "You know, when I first started flying 20 years ago, I faced a lot of situations similar to what you experienced today. People who didn't think I belonged in the cockpit, who questioned my qualifications, who made assumptions about what I was capable of." David looked at her with new respect. "How did you handle it?" "The same way you did today. With dignity, with facts, and by refusing to let other people's prejudices define my worth." She paused and looked at him seriously. "But I also learned something important along the way. When you face discrimination and overcome it, you have a responsibility to use that experience to help others." They had reached the baggage claim area, and Captain Thompson stopped walking. "That video that young lady took is going to be seen by millions of people. Your story is going to matter to a lot of folks who have faced similar situations. Are you ready for that?" David thought about it honestly. A few hours ago, he had just been a nervous teenager trying to get to school. Now he was about to become the face of a viral video about standing up to discrimination. It felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time. "I think so," he said finally. "If my story can help other people find their courage, then maybe what happened today was worth it." Captain Thompson smiled and shook his hand. "I think you're going to do just fine, Mr. Johnson, in engineering and in life." As she walked away, David pulled out his phone to call his grandmother. She answered on the first ring, her voice full of worry. "Baby, how was the flight? Did everything go okay?" David looked around the busy Atlanta airport, thinking about everything that had happened. The discrimination, the fear, the moment he found his courage, the support from strangers, and the validation from Captain Thompson. It had been the most challenging and empowering experience of his young life. "Grandma," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I have so much to tell you. But the most important thing is this. I stood up for myself today. I didn't back down. And I proved that I belong wherever I choose to be." He could hear the pride in her voice when she responded, "I knew you would, baby. I always knew you would." As David waited for his luggage, he thought about the 6 weeks ahead at Georgia Tech and the future beyond that. Today had taught him that he was stronger than he knew, that there were good people in the world who would stand up for what's right, and that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight for your own dignity and worth. The scholarship. Student who had almost been forced to give up his seat was now a young man who understood the power of standing firm in the face of injustice, and that, he realized, was going to serve him well in whatever challenges lay ahead.